According to the Kansas Historical Society's official records, there are exactly 627 incorporated communities in Kansas. But according to a leaked 1987 federal survey that was never supposed to see public light, there are actually 742 documented settlements scattered across the state's wheat fields and prairie grasslands. That's 115 communities that don't officially exist. These aren't just old homesteads or abandoned farmhouses. We're talking about entire towns with post offices, schools, churches, and main streets that have been systematically removed from state records, deleted from GPS databases, and erased from official maps. Some were eliminated after military incidents that the government doesn't want to acknowledge. You're watching Undiscovered America, where we explore overlooked corners of the country that most maps and travel guides won't show you. Today, we'll venture into the deliberately hidden Kansas, where ghost towns tell stories that someone decided the public wasn't meant to hear. Number 13, Treece. Treece officially doesn't exist anymore, but what makes it unique among Kansas ghost towns is that it was the first community in state history to be completely evacuated and unincorporated due to environmental contamination. And the government is still trying to hide how bad the situation really was. Treece sat on the Kansas-Oklahoma border in an area that had been heavily mined for lead and zinc since the early 1900s. For decades, the town of about 130 people lived above an underground maze of abandoned mine shafts, not knowing that their community was slowly sinking into the earth and that their water supply was contaminated with toxic heavy metals. In 2012, the Environmental Protection Agency declared Treece uninhabitable and offered to buy out every resident. But instead of simply relocating the residents, the EPA took the unusual step of officially unincorporating the town, meaning that Treece legally ceased to exist as a community. What the government hasn't publicized is that the contamination in Treece was far worse than they initially admitted. According to leaked EPA documents, the groundwater contamination extends for miles beyond the town boundaries. The decision to unincorporate Treece wasn't just about relocating residents. It was about limiting legal liability for a contamination disaster that's much larger than the public knows. Number 12, Nicodemus. Nicodemus is officially recognized as a National Historic Site, but what most visitors don't realize is that the current town is only a small fraction of what once existed, and the rest of the original settlement has been deliberately obscured to hide the true story of what happened there. Nicodemus was founded in 1877 by African-American settlers fleeing post-Reconstruction violence in the South. At its peak in the 1880s, the town was home to over 700 people and was one of the most successful all-black communities in the American West. But by 1910, the population had dwindled to fewer than 200. The official explanation for Nicodemus's decline is that the railroad bypassed the community, making it economically unviable. But recently discovered documents suggest a more disturbing story. Local newspapers from the 1890s describe systematic harassment of Nicodemus residents by white settlers, including arson attacks, cattle theft, and intimidation that drove many families away. The current National Historic Site includes only the small area where a few buildings still stand. The original Nicodemus covered over 320 acres and included a business district, residential neighborhoods, farms, and a school. The boundaries of the historic site have been deliberately limited to avoid including areas where evidence of the town's destruction might still be found. Number 11, Coronado Heights. Coronado Heights was supposed to be Kansas's answer to Mount Rushmore, a massive tourism destination that would put the state on the map. But the project was secretly abandoned after construction crews discovered something underground that the government classified immediately. In the 1930s, the Works Progress Administration began an ambitious project to create a tourist attraction at Coronado Heights, a hill in central Kansas, where Spanish explorer Francisco Vázquez de Coronado supposedly camped in 1541. Construction began in 1936, but in 1938, work stopped abruptly, and the project was officially canceled due to budget constraints. But according to a former WPA worker, the real reason was that excavation crews had discovered something underground that immediately attracted federal attention. Within days, military personnel arrived at the site, ordered all workers to leave, and classified whatever had been found. The worker described seeing military trucks removing unidentified objects and claimed that all workers were required to sign agreements never to discuss what they had seen. Number 10. Silkville. Silkville was a utopian community founded by French immigrants who believed they could revolutionize American agriculture by raising silkworms in Kansas. But the town was abandoned so quickly that conspiracy theories have persisted for over a century about what really happened there. In 1869, Ernest Valton de Boissière, a wealthy French philosopher, purchased 3,500 acres in Franklin County with plans to create a socialist community based on silkworm cultivation. The community attracted over 100 residents who believed they were participating in an experiment that would transform agriculture and society. For several years, the community appeared to be succeeding, producing silk products sold throughout the Midwest. But in 1892, Silkville was suddenly abandoned. The official explanation was that silkworm cultivation proved unsuitable for Kansas climate. But the speed and completeness of the abandonment has fueled speculation that something more dramatic occurred. Local legends suggest mysterious illnesses, strange discoveries during excavation work, or conflicts with government authorities over socialist principles. Number 9. Nickel was a mining boom town that existed for less than 5 years, but housed over 2,000 people before being completely abandoned. Not because the mines played out, but because of a mining accident that killed dozens of workers and was covered up by the mining company. Nickel was established in 1905 when large deposits of lead and zinc were discovered in Cherokee County. The town grew explosively, attracting miners from across the country. Within 3 years, Nickel had become one of the largest communities in southeastern Kansas. But on March 15, 1910, a mine explosion killed 23 workers and injured dozens more. The mining company initially blamed the explosion on worker error, but survivors claimed that company officials had ignored safety warnings about dangerous gas accumulations in the mine shafts. Instead of investigating the accident thoroughly, local authorities accepted the company's explanation and allowed mining operations to resume within days. But many residents had lost confidence in the safety of the mines, and families began leaving the community. The mining company decided to close the nickel operations and move their equipment to other locations. Within 6 months, nearly the entire population had left. Number 8. Irving was a planned railroad town that was supposed to become a major transportation hub, but it was abandoned before completion when surveyors discovered that the town had been built directly on top of an ancient Native American burial ground. And strange events began occurring that drove away workers and residents. Irving was platted in 1887 by the Missouri Pacific Railroad, which planned to build a major rail yard and switching station at the site in central Kansas. The railroad company invested heavily in the project, constructing a depot, roundhouse, worker housing, and the beginning of a commercial district. But as construction progressed, workers began reporting unusual discoveries. Excavation for building foundations uncovered human remains, pottery, and other artifacts that indicated the site had been used as a burial ground by Native American tribes for centuries. Railroad officials ordered workers to rebury the remains and continue building. Soon after, workers and residents began reporting strange occurrences. Tools and equipment would disappear overnight. Workers reported hearing voices and seeing figures in areas where no one should have been present. The situation reached a crisis point in 1889 when 3 workers died in accidents that witnesses described as impossible to explain through normal causes. Rather than confront the growing controversy, the Missouri Pacific Railroad quietly abandoned the Irving project in 1890. Number 7. Zenith. Zenith was founded as a temperance community where alcohol was completely banned, but it was abandoned after residents discovered that the town's founder was secretly running a massive bootlegging operation from hidden facilities beneath the community. In 1885, Reverend William Blackstone established Zenith in Barton County as a model Christian community where alcohol would be prohibited and residents would live according to strict moral principles. The town attracted religious families from across the Midwest who were committed to the temperance movement. Zenith grew steadily through the 1890s with a population of over 400 people, multiple churches, a school, and businesses that catered to the religious community. Blackstone was revered as a moral leader, but in 1901, federal revenue agents raided Zenith and discovered an extensive network of underground tunnels and storage facilities used to produce and distribute illegal alcohol throughout western Kansas. The scandal was devastating. Blackstone was arrested for federal tax evasion and illegal liquor production. Number 6. Fossil Station. Fossil Station was a railroad depot town that was evacuated overnight in 1952 after paleontologists working in the area made a discovery that was immediately classified by the military and has remained secret for over 70 years. Fossil Station was established in the 1880s to serve railroad operations in an area of western Kansas known for its abundant fossil deposits. The town was small, with a population of about 200 people, but it was economically stable because of the railroad jobs and the tourist trade generated by fossil hunters and researchers. In 1952, a team of paleontologists from the University of Kansas was conducting a routine excavation near Fossil Station when they uncovered something that immediately attracted federal attention. According to witnesses, military personnel arrived at the site within hours and established a security perimeter around the excavation area. Within a week, residents of Fossil Station received official notices that the town was being evacuated for national security reasons. They were given 48 hours to pack their belongings and leave. By the end of August 1952, Fossil Station was completely empty. Number 5. Liberty. Liberty was established as a socialist commune in the 1890s, but it was infiltrated and destroyed by government agents who were determined to prevent the spread of radical political ideas in rural Kansas. Liberty was founded in 1893 by a group of socialist activists who believed that they could create a working example of collective ownership and democratic decision-making. The community attracted about 150 residents who shared resources, made decisions collectively, and attempted to create an alternative to capitalist society. For several years, Liberty appeared to be succeeding. The community operated cooperative farms, shared ownership of equipment and buildings, and made decisions through democratic assemblies. They published a newspaper promoting socialist ideas, but Liberty's success attracted unwanted attention from government authorities concerned about radical political ideas. According to documents discovered decades later, the Department of Justice infiltrated the community with undercover agents to disrupt the socialist experiment. Number 4. Mineral was a boom town built around salt mining operations, but it was abandoned after miners broke through into an underground chamber that contained something so unusual that the military took control of the site and classified it as a national security location. Mineral was established in 1895 when large salt deposits were discovered in central Kansas. The town grew rapidly around the mining operations, reaching a population of over 800 people who worked in the salt mines or provided services to the mining community. In 1943, during World War II, miners working in the deepest sections of the mine broke through into a natural underground chamber that had never been explored. What they found in that chamber has remained classified for over 80 years, but witnesses reported that it was unlike anything geologists had ever seen. Within days of the discovery, military personnel arrived at Mineral and took control of the mining operations. The civilian workers were removed from the site, and the town's residents were told that the area was needed for strategic wartime production. Most families were relocated to other communities, and Mineral was essentially abandoned. Number 3. Haven appears on some historical maps, but doesn't appear on others, leading to confusion about whether it ever actually existed. But the truth is that Haven was a classified government facility, disguised as a small farming community during the Cold War. According to official records, Haven was a small farming community established in the 1940s in rural Kansas. It appeared on some maps and census records, but information about the town was inconsistent and often contradictory. What the public didn't know was that Haven was actually a classified research facility operated by the Atomic Energy Commission. The farming community was cover for secret research into agricultural applications of radioactive materials. The facility looked like a typical Kansas farming town, but the buildings contained laboratories where scientists studied how radioactive materials could increase crop yields, preserve food, and create new agricultural products. Number 2. New Chicago. New Chicago was supposed to become Kansas's largest city, a planned metropolis that would rival Chicago itself. But it was abandoned after investors discovered that the entire project was an elaborate real estate fraud that had bilked thousands of people out of their life savings. In 1905, a company called the Kansas Development Corporation began promoting New Chicago as the future commercial center of the American West. They purchased thousands of acres in central Kansas and created elaborate plans for a city that would eventually house over 100,000 people. The promotional materials for New Chicago were incredibly sophisticated, featuring detailed maps, architectural drawings, and financial projections that convinced thousands of investors to purchase lots in the planned city. Construction began in 1906 with great fanfare, but in 1907, investors began to realize that something was wrong. Despite months of construction activity, very few people were actually moving to New Chicago. The promised railroad connections never materialized, and the industrial development that was supposed to drive the city's growth was nowhere to be seen. Investigation revealed that the Kansas Development Corporation was a fraudulent operation that had never intended to build a real city. When the fraud was exposed, the few buildings that had been constructed were abandoned, and thousands of investors lost their money. Number 1. Central City. Central City was the most successful cover-up in Kansas history, a thriving railroad town that was completely erased from existence after a train accident released classified military materials, creating a contamination disaster that the government has hidden for over 60 years. Central City was a busy railroad town established in the 1880s at the intersection of two major rail lines in central Kansas. By the 1950s, it had grown to over 1,200 residents and was an important transportation hub for both civilian and military freight. On November 14, 1959, a military freight train carrying classified materials derailed just outside Central City. The accident involved cars containing experimental chemical weapons that were being transported to a testing facility in Colorado. The derailment released toxic materials into the air and contaminated a large area around the town. The military response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, Central City was surrounded by troops who evacuated all residents and established a quarantine zone. The official explanation was that the train had been carrying conventional military supplies and that the evacuation was a precautionary measure, but the evacuation became permanent. Residents were relocated to other communities and told they could never return to Central City because of ongoing military operations in the area. The government purchased all property in the town, demolished every building, and removed all evidence that Central City had ever existed. The contamination from the 1959 accident was far worse than the government ever admitted. According to classified documents that were accidentally released in the 1990s, the chemical weapons involved in the derailment were experimental nerve agents that had never been tested outside of laboratory conditions. Today, the location where Central City once stood is restricted military land that's officially used for training exercises. But environmental monitoring equipment is visible throughout the area, suggesting that the government is still dealing with contamination from the 1959 accident. So what do these 13 hidden ghost towns tell us about Kansas and about the stories that governments and corporations sometimes decide the public shouldn't know? First, there's the realization that official records and maps don't always tell the complete truth about what happened in a place. From Treece being legally erased from existence to Central City being completely wiped off the map, these stories reveal that entire communities can be removed from official records when their existence becomes inconvenient or embarrassing. Second, there's the recurring theme of cover-ups and secrecy surrounding environmental disasters, industrial accidents, and government operations. Many of these towns were abandoned because of events that authorities decided were too sensitive, too embarrassing, or too dangerous for public knowledge. Third, there's the vulnerability of small communities to forces beyond their control. Whether it was environmental contamination, corporate fraud, government secrecy, or simple economic changes, these towns were abandoned because external forces made their continued existence impossible or undesirable. But perhaps most importantly, these ghost towns remind us that the landscape we see today might be hiding stories that someone decided we weren't meant to know. The wheat fields and prairie grasslands of Kansas look empty and peaceful. But beneath that serene surface lie the remains of communities that were deliberately erased, stories that were classified, and secrets that are still being kept. These 13 forgotten places aren't just Kansas history. They're reminders that truth can be buried, records can be altered, and entire communities can disappear when powerful interests decide that's what needs to happen. The next time you drive across Kansas and see nothing but endless fields and big sky, remember that you might be passing through places where entire towns once stood, places where people lived and worked and dreamed, places that someone decided you were never meant to find.